Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today, I talk to an actual icon of the game industry music scene, the composer Jesper Kyd. He's Danish, so that's Jesper, not Jesper, in case this is the first time you've ever heard it pronounced out loud. He is known for his outstanding contribution to the world of game music through the Assassin's Creed franchise, and of course also Hitman, Borderlands. The list is quite lengthy. And for this conversation, we basically did one long walk through memory lane, and he took me through childhood through to running his own game studio and shipping games on the Sega Genesis, which I didn't even know about prior to this conversation, and of course up through Assassin's Creed Valhalla just these last few months. It was a wonderful chat. He's a wonderful guy, and I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
So today is especially unique because for the last year we've been doing these remotely, and today it's the most egregiously hilarious to be doing remotely when I think you are just out of a good solid frisbee throws range away from me right now. So it feels especially sad to be recording this not face to face, as we are in the hopefully tail end of the apocalypse. But as if that weren't enough, my illustrious guest today was also born on this day. And so we have of course, I guess by the time this is published, that will not hold true anymore, but we'll pretend that your birthday is simultaneously right now and at the exact moment of all future listeners. So I say, welcome and happy birthday, Jesper Kyd.
Hey, thank you. Great to be here.
I'm glad to know that talking to me constitutes your ideal birthday plans.
It's up there, man. It's way up there.
Yeah, well, we'll see how much you regret that decision before too long. How are you doing? How are you holding up in the realm of the apocalypse in general? Do you have birthday plans? Give me a life update.
Things are going pretty well. I've started writing a lot of music. Again, I took a little bit of a break there after Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and it feels really great to be back writing music. It's a surreal time, we live in. I have kids, and to see what they're going through is probably the most heartbreaking thing. As a composer, you're used to being isolated in a room, kind of by yourself all day, except when you go and record soloist or with an orchestra or choir, you do some traveling. But the majority of time, the vast majority, is definitely spent sitting alone in a room. So for me personally, I haven't had to adapt that much, but to see the effect it has on my family is really kind of heartbreaking.
How old are your kids again?
I got a 12 and a 15-year-old.
So I assume they've been doing all remote school and, Zoom classes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, remote school since March. And, my kid was supposed to start high school. Well, he did start high school, but he's doing high school in his room, which...
Yeah, that's definitely not how it's supposed to be.
No, and me growing up in Denmark... the only thing I really know about high school is what I've seen from the movies, and so. But I do, but I do know that everything builds up to this moment, high school, right? It's supposed to be like this big build-up, and then he finally gets there, right? My son, and it's like, okay, he's in his room.
I guess, you were expecting, like in Force Awakens, when Han Solo says, "It's all true, it's all true." You're expecting that the all true is, some combination of The Breakfast Club and Clueless and innumerable other mythical high school movies. Does that mean that the Denmark high school experience is wildly different from that?
I would say so. So the school system is different. We stay in the same with the same class throughout the first like 9 or 10 years. Yeah, so if you have the same class with kindergarten and you go all the way to 10th grade, that's 11 years with the same people, and you don't change students when you go into different classes either. It's always those 20 people or so. When I grew up, it was about 20, and so you spend like 11 years with those people, and there's a lot of the same teachers as well. It goes through the whole school years. So
That's
it's
mind blowing.
it
I had
is.
no idea that must mean that group of 20 are either lifelong friends or you are eager to never see each other again by the time you finish.
In hindsight, it's a very surreal way of doing things, and I do think that the way the system works over here, you come out of it a much more social creature. uh, there's this conception that Americans are very outgoing, and it's something that we always experience in Europe. When you meet Americans, they're not shy, they're always outgoing, they're always like very talkative and this, and I actually think it could have something to do with the school system, in that you're always socializing with new people, you're always in new classes, you're always it seems like you're always changing school every 2 3 years. I do think that has a lot to do with that thing. I mean, I can't really explain it any other way.
No, that
I've
I,
never thought about that actually, but it's an interesting point. That's for sure.
yeah, I can't. It's hard for me to wrap my brain. I guess as different as my childhood was, would be equally difficult for you to imagine because they're so polar opposites in that way. Does that mean that you like how big would the total school be in which this class of 20 is a part? What's the kind of the
Right.
next circle outward look like in terms of size?
So my school was about 1,200 kids.
Okay, well at least that because I was trying to wrap my brain around what the scale would be because, for example, the high school that I went to was 4,000 students,
Right.
and the class sizes were probably similar to what you're describing, but every 45 minutes it's a total reshuffle, and so you end up exposed to hundreds of people at any given day.
Yeah.
So the idea of being kind of sealed in with a group, it's almost like these are your family for the next decade. I hope you like them.
Yes.
It's quite the that's quite the thing. Well, so then I'm probably going to end up bouncing all around because there's just so much I want to get to. Your career is truly illustrious, but I'd like to kind of tiptoe towards it a bit. Given what you just said, which I honestly had no idea of, Denmark is one of those countries that I'm working towards as I check off the various destinations of the world that I've visited. I've yet to go there, so I'm largely in the dark, and I had no idea the school system works that way. How did emergent musical talent come about? Like, is music a big part of that education for everybody growing up, and when did it sort of take shape as a dominant force in your life?
I wouldn't say it's a big part of it. We had like music classes, I think once a week, once we reached a certain age, class. But the way it happened to me, there was a piano at my home, and I liked, sitting and playing on that piano and just, messing around. And wherever we went to visit, I have a huge family, and so whenever we went to visit my grandparents or aunts and uncles and all that stuff, no matter where we went, there was always a piano. I don't know. It was like the rule of my family. You have to have a piano or something because there's one everywhere. So you go to your grandparents for like 2 3 weeks or something, and it's like out in the middle of nowhere, and there's like fields of grass and cows and stuff. You're like, oh, there's a piano. So I just ended up spending a lot of time playing on the piano. And then I got a Commodore 64, my brother and I, when we were like 13 years old. And I can interject there that I did do some studies in school. I think maybe it was like the eighth or ninth grade or something, where I studied like guitar and classical composition on piano. Trying to figure out how music was made. It was always on the sidelines, though.
Was anything propelling that? Like, was this especially encouraged by your family or just your own curiosity?
It was my own curiosity, and it really did help me figure out the piano and figure out how everything can be divided into chords, and just kind of a very kind of basic place to start. But it definitely sparked my interest, and like once I got the Commodore 64, which is like the first game console video game, I mean, the first computer that actually has a analog sound chip inside. And so these scores were really incredible back then. I remember getting into video games and video game music at the same time, playing these games on the Commodore 64 and hearing what these composers could do with this analog sound chip. I just thought, I have never heard anything like this before. It absolutely fascinated me. Um, and that's really when I thought, wow, you can actually create a complete song here. You have a sequencer, you can do a bass, and you can do a melody, you can do an arrangement, you can even do some percussion. I can create a full track here. And that's when it just became completely addicting, I guess. To me, I had to do like a track every day. And from I was about 13, I just wrote a track every day. And after the Commodore 64, it went to the Amiga, which is the next computer Commodore made. And that had, instead of having three SID channels, and by the way, the Commodore 64, that music is still live. That music is called SID music, chiptune. You know, that's that all came from the Commodore 64. That's where it was invented. So that was the world I was embraced in as a like a young teenager. And then it went to the Amiga, which has four channels, not three, but they had four sample channels. So suddenly you could start sampling everything, and I would, put on my favorite CDs, and I would try to like grab a snare drum sound that was played like completely alone, so you could like,
Yeah,
I can grab that snare drum and stuff, because there was like nothing. We didn't have any tools.
yeah, of course.
We were just trying to figure this out. This computer came out, and nobody had any like kick-ass music programs for it or anything. So once that really started, a program which was the first tracker, and a tracker is a special way of making music, which is a place where you put the notes in with your keyboard, and then it kind of scrolls the screen, and you can see the notes hit where it hits in real time. So I became like a huge tracker musician back then, and did like hundreds of tracks as well on the Amiga, with all these samples. So I got a lot of experience with sampling and cutting up samples and creating new stuff on my own instruments and that kind of stuff. And that all, has stayed with me all these years.
Do you
Um,
have those recordings still? Does that music even exist in a way that you can actually hear it?
I am ashamed to say it's on YouTube.
Really? Oh man, I know what I'm doing later today.
I'm just kidding. I appreciate that music and everything it did, but don't expect you gotta listen to it for what it is.
I will listen to it with absolutely sky high expectations.
And not only that, I was just, I don't know, 15 trying to figure out the world, right? So, but what's interesting is I entered something called the European demo scene, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know
Um,
what would separate the European from the US demo scene, but that like if it has its own special quality. But the demo scene in general was obviously where a lot of folks kind of cut their teeth in
right.
that time.
And the European demo scene was really like where most of the demos were made. The American demo scene was very small compared to Europe. Um, and so I had all this music I was making, and I was introduced to some people, and some of my friends were programmers and graphic artists, so we started making our own demos. A demo is basically like a 5-8 minute demonstration that shows, like a music video, it shows what you can do. So if you're an artist, you're going to do some great logos and some beautiful pictures and some nice design, and the programmer will put all that together, and then of course it needs to have music too. So I started doing music for all these different demo groups, and we kind of rose in the ranks, you could say, in the demo scene, and we kind of got to the top with our. We did a demo called Hardwired, which is considered a kind of a pioneering demo. And that's when we decided, okay, what are we going to do? We have all this kind of talent. Two different demo groups have gotten together, and now we have a group of super programmers, and we have a group of with me on music and my friend Michael with graphics. So we decided to start a game company. This was back when I was, I don't know, 18 or 19 or something. And then we started making games. So our first game got sold to Sega. It's called Subterranea. It was on the Sega Genesis. And so we moved from Copenhagen to Boston. Now in Copenhagen, it was awesome. We had gotten paid for our first game, and to us it was like so much money. So we got like this huge apartment in the middle of Copenhagen in like 3 levels, and there was always like at least like 18 or 20 people in there, and it was like a giant party, you know. That's what we left behind, and then we went to Boston and started making more games. We released games on the Sega Saturn, like Scorcher, and Amok was part of that as well. At some point, I also did some more Genesis scores.
Were you doing anything other than the music? Because it sounds like you were this little squad, and that you, as was often the case in those days, the composer is also the sound designer, is also kind of a co-programmer to make the music actually work. And the
Right.
days before middleware, how beyond the normal just musical duties did you have, or were you part of a little audio crew?
That's a really good question, actually, because we did make our own music program for the Sega Genesis. Now, Sega had their own tools which could play back samples in a really, really low bit rate. I think it was like 8-bit or something. So every time you would sample something, it would always be like, it was just be like noise, and then a remnant of what it's supposed to sound like. So we did the opposite. We said we're going to make our own music program, no samples, because the Genesis is just crap at samples. And so, but it's very good at FM. So we were able to create a program that had 6 channels playing back FM quality in CD quality, 44 hertz. Beautiful. And so I used that program. And I don't know anything about programming, or so I was just it was a tracker program, because that's the world we came from, and so I used that program that we did, and we only used that for our own games. So it's really cool.
How did you manage to escape being a programmer? Because that's such a sort of classic feature of composers at that time, when there just was so little by way of what we would call middleware now, or even just the tools themselves.
Right. So that's actually an interesting story. So on the Commodore 64, there were some programs that had been officially released, like Electro Sound, I remember, was one program my dad bought. And I was like, all right, I'm going to try this program, because I was so fascinated with these Commodore 64 composers that, yes, would do their own programming, like Martin Galway and Rob Hubbard and Tim Follin and Ben Dalish and all these guys doing such incredible music, which these days are being performed by orchestras. Anyway,
we'll get there.
So what was cool was, once I entered the demo scene, on a Commodore 64, and they would send me new. So it's basically I signed up for some mail order in a newspaper, and so they would start sending me discs of stuff. And lo and behold, on one of the discs was a new music program called Sound Monitor, which is actually a program that I found out later Chris Schulzbeck made. And it was a program that was and it was a it was a program that was released in a German computer magazine that you would type in yourself. Do you remember those things?
Yeah. Well, it's just slightly before my time, but I was kind of a precocious nerd, and so I was always looking. I always had a bunch of different magazines as I just tried to vacuum up everything, and that is absolutely one of those phenomena that I that was sort of just ending basically as I became aware in the world, because. Yeah, that's a legacy of a different era completely.
Right.
Imagine that now. It's like a phone book. The sheer amount of code.
Yeah, it's crazy. You would get I was on the tail end of that too. I think I tried to do one. They would give you would buy a magazine and it would have like 20 pages of just data you would have to program just like it was written, right? And it was like BASIC or something like that on the Commodore 64. And you would like program it in, and by the end of the day, you would have like a little game where you could like move a thing around, and there was a thing coming at you, and that was it. After spending like I don't know 6 hours or more programming this in, so it truly was a different era. But anyway, so Sound Monitor was one of those programs. So when I got that program, that was the first program I saw that could actually do music that sounded really good. So I got completely addicted to that music program. And had I not entered the demo scene, I would have not been sent this program, which came from the underground. You couldn't buy this program in the store, but it was spread through the demo scene like all the demos are.
Right.
So, my path has very much been dominated by the demo scene, especially how I got my beginning.
Is there any current incarnation of that scene? I feel like the indie game world has little localized pockets that are probably similar in flavor, but is there anything today that's sort of comparable to what it was then? I can't think of anything.
Well, the demo scene is still alive, and people are still programming things on the Commodore 64 and Amiga. But these are the same people for the most part. Actually, I'm not sure, but I know there's a lot of people from back then that are still having fun programming on these machines and sending out demos to the world. And it's kind of mind-boggling to think about. And a lot of companies actually came out of the demo scene. Companies like D.I.C.E or Crytek and Remedy and IO Interactive, and the list goes on. These are all people. These companies were founded by some of the strongest people from the demo scene.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. It's the bedroom coders of that era. It's kind of, I guess the closest thing would be like game jams today, where every now and again there's a big hit game that it turns out 1 year before was hatched up in some weekend in some person's apartment as part of a game jam, and then they realized, I think there's actually something here.
Right.
But,
and that's an interesting point you make there, because that is very much the perspective of, I would say, the difference between what we did in the European demo scene and how things work, especially in America, because in America, things are more about, creating a product that can be successful and that can turn a profit. And that makes complete sense. I'm totally behind that. But for some reason, the European demo scene, we were never about trying to create profit. It was always just about trying to outdo each other, with routines and programming tricks and music and graphics. And that was what drove us to outdo each other. Oh, I can do something better. Oh, he's got like this and that many, polygons on the screen. I can do twice as many. Oh yeah? Okay. And so somebody goes and programs their own 3D routine to show that they can do twice as many. And then somebody's like, I got an idea how we can do more. So that was like the drive, and it just kept this demo scene alive. Of course, you would have demo competitions at these big demo parties or hacker parties or whatever you call them, where like thousands of people would get together, and you would present these demos there that debuted at these places, and there was like a first prize and a second and third prize.
I'm
And that was,
picturing those parties. I'm imagining those parties as like the opening rave scene in the movie Blade.
right. The difference between the opening rave scenes, which I very much was part of too, is that the smell. Can I just tell you?
Yeah. It's I can only imagine. That's
Because these parties would be held at like schools, and then everybody would just take over the school over the weekend, and each like classroom would be a different demo group, and they would all sit in there and try to finish their demo. It's really an unusual kind of phenomenon.
Do you have nostalgia for that period? Do you ever find yourself thinking, I wish I could do that today, or I wish there was some component of that in my life? Or do you feel like, no, that chapter is closed and I'm grateful to it, but I'm happily past it?
I mean, that chapter is definitely closed, but it was a very fun period of my life, and walking around like a 16-year-old and signing people's T-shirts, it's totally surreal, and the amount of the amount of people that got to know who you are. I mean, they had like charts and stuff, like the official Euro chart, who is the best musician this month. I mean, there was so much going on in that scene. There was such a collective of so many people. It was a really wonderful place for sure, and I met a lot of great people.
It's funny that
insanely talented people.
Oh, undoubtedly. I'm sure they were saying the same about you, and I think it's funny to me that you would call out the idea of signing T-shirts as a novelty when I can attest to the fact, having shared concerts and stages with you in a few different countries now. I've seen you be solicited for autographs quite a few times, and I think that will only continue to increase in frequency. So it sounds like that was all really mostly just a kind of a portent of what was to come, and not so much an aberration.
You too, man. People are definitely asking plenty of autographs over there as well for you.
Well, I think because they see me as the guy standing next to you, and the two atypically tall people. Although I think you're several inches taller than I am, and I that's not so common that I find people that I think, damn, I actually have to kind of tilt here.
Well, that's the thing. If you go to Denmark, people are pretty tall there, women and men, everyone actually.
Yeah, it's all those Viking genes, and well, so let's move forward. Then you mentioned that you came to Boston, and obviously you were starting to get your foot on the ground in the game industry pretty early. Was there ever any parallel interest in because I know you've done some television and some film and things like that, but was that part of your interest then, or were you just, I'm all about games?
I'm all about games. That was my philosophy back then. It is true that that I very much love working on film and TV now, but I love working on all three. Games has to be in there as well for me. But in the beginning, it was we were a game company. I was part owner of a game company. That was like what we did, and the games we first did on the Sega Genesis were also doing things that people on the Sega Genesis had never done before. We even had full motion video running on the Genesis. If you play Redstone, it has full motion video in it. Nobody had done that before. That's kind of the legacy of coming out of the demo scene. You want to keep like doing things that are new or fresh or something. Like when Hitman 1 came out, they had ragdoll physics, which I believe was the first time that had been done as well. So we were totally caught up in that whole, when you start up Redstone, there's like a huge list that comes up, like of all the programming tricks we put in the game, and it's just like, boom, look at all this.
Well, so then what led to the eventual migration west and the kind of pivoting to freelance composer? Because it sounds like you obviously had a really good and powerfully creative team there. So something had surely disrupted that or changed your priorities. When did that happen?
So after we did the second Sega Genesis game, we started working on 32X and Sega Saturn, and so we were involved in early stages of a Batman game, and so we were moved. We had to be on the West Coast for that. So that's when we moved out to LA and started working on that. That didn't work out, so we started working on two other games for the Sega Saturn, which was a Mock and Scourger. I did some music for Sega for a game called Adventures of Batman and Robin, which is this huge techno rave. It's like my I don't know, my homage to the rave scene in a Batman game.
I can't believe that is one I have no. I have absolutely. I have no contact with that game somehow. That sounds like something else that I need. You're basically giving me a shopping list of my back catalog Jesper music that I'm desperate to hear.
Yeah, that's something else. I couldn't believe they actually wanted me to go as far as I could with this music, but it's a very kind of Gunstar Heroes like shooter type of game where everything is completely chaotic all the time. So it fitted very well. I thought, hey, techno rave, let's do it.
Well, so then what led to eventually going freelance? When did that pivot happen?
Yeah, so we were done with LA. We wanted to go back to New York. That's where we always wanted to be. And so we moved back. We moved to New York. This was in '97, end of '96, kind of thing. And the company we were working with, who helped publish our games, they were kind of like a co-publisher before it went to Sega. Um, they didn't get paid. They got in a lawsuit, and yeah, 3 years later they did win the lawsuit, and they did get paid. But that 3 years later, everybody had moved on. So when they didn't get paid, all my friends went back home to Denmark. I stayed. One of my other friends, a mathematician, stayed as well. But the all the programmers and graphics and all that stuff, they went back to Denmark and started IO Interactive.
Well,
Um,
that's a nice preview of where this conversation will be going shortly. But so, what made you feel differently than the rest of them? Knowing that you had all come over to the U.S. together, migrated different coasts together. Why did you you and your mathematician? What made you different, or what made you feel strongly enough about staying that's so in opposition to the rest?
well, I really love New York. I love America. It's not to say that my friends didn't love it over here, but I was really not ready to move home, and I also was not ready to be part of a company where I could kind of guess that I would be working on on all sides of the audio. I wanted to do the music, and I wanted to do music for more than like one game every 2 years or 3 years or however long it takes to make a game. I felt I had much more music in me than that. So that's when I decided I'm going to stay in New York City, and try to enter the game industry on my own, and try to get as many try to get some freelance work and see how that goes. And some of the first games I worked on, of course, it was IO's first game, Hitman Codename 47. It was also MDK2, which is a game from BioWare. And as well, I worked with Shiny Entertainment, Interplay, a game called Messiah. So those three games came out, and suddenly I was kind of a person who had some music in some pretty big games.
I had no idea you worked on MDK.
The
That's
second one.
Well, yeah, sure. That franchise, I should say. Um, That's so funny. That's one of those that has come up in conversation recently, sort of randomly, and I never it occurs to me I didn't even bother to check to see who had scored it, and it's certainly worth, I guess, turning our attention to IO now. Walk us through just that initial uh, the initial conversations and the initial sort of process, and what was your impression of it? And because it's worth framing that one of maybe the most recent time we saw each other was in Poland when there was a whole concert dedicated to your music with Hitman prominently featured. So here we are, what, 10, how many years later, 15 years later or something like that, and the music from that game is still of such importance to people that they're literally filling auditoriums for people to come hear it be played. So I'm always curious about what's the initial impression on the behalf of the creators, who are often not quite aware that they're about to make something that's essentially a classic in the making.
Right. So Hitman 2
By the way, I'm
is.
glad that you have. I worded all of that so poorly that I'm really glad that you have any idea what I'm asking.
I think I know what you're getting at, and it's actually an interesting story because Hitman 2, I did not, come up with the idea of an orchestral score for that game. That came from the CEO of IO Interactive, János Flosser, and he used to be involved with the symphonic scene in Hungary. He's Hungarian, and so he came to me and he's like, Jesper, for the second Hitman, we're doing the Budapest Symphony Orchestra and the Hungarian Radio Choir. And mind you, up until that point, I was still like writing like rave music for games and electronic music for games.
Was that your first time, period, dabbling with orchestral palette?
It was. I had no idea what I was getting into. I did not know anything about orchestral music. It had just not been on my radar. I had been very focused on evolving my own instruments and my sampling and electronic music and just how do I keep making that better. That was my world. If you listen to MDK2, I mean that's an insane rave soundtrack that I wrote, and it has some orchestral music in it from another composer, and so we blended our styles together. But some of the tracks are pure rave music. I mean, the 303 is screaming in that one. So I just dove into that world and just completely lost myself for a couple of years in that world and came out with, the soundtrack for Hitman 2. And it was really surreal. You go to, Hungary, and there's like 89 people in the orchestra and all these people in the recording booth, and then we do the choir with 60 people. I was so overwhelmed, and at the same time, the Danish national radio was there, filming, and it was just like, what happened? But I was completely awestruck, and that's when my I would say it definitely changed me, and I was open to that world of symphonic writing, and I knew right away I want to do more of this kind of music, and I want to do more symphonic music. I had completely opened my head up to all this stuff.
How did you even figure out how to get into it? Because, for those unaware, just the sheer process of preparing scores and parts, and the sheet music, and the preparing for the sessions and recording in Pro Tools, and like all the prep work that goes in. If you haven't done it before, you don't even know all the steps that are needed. And
Right.
so how did you, if that was so novel to you, did you turn to somebody to kind of mentor through the or hire a producer or something? Because I just can't even imagine how steep a hill that would feel on the first time without some kind of having been an assistant or something before that. So how did
Right.
you even tackle it?
Yeah. So in New York City, I had a good friend, Pierre Foldis, and I had another good friend, Jun Michumachi. And so June was all about sound design and electronic music. Pierre was a French. He is a French film composer, and he was all about the orchestra. And then there was, me, kind of in the middle. And when I started working on Hitman 2, um, Pierre became the orchestrator on that project, and he
Oh,
also, helped, prepare all the scores and all this stuff. And so he taught me the meaning of what I was getting myself into. So yeah.
do you sometimes when people kind of dip their toes into the world of the orchestra in particular, the the kind of novelty of it sometimes kind of breeds strange choices. Do you? Because now obviously you've I've worked with the orchestra a bunch of times since then. Is that something that you look back and hear that music and think, what what bizarre choices I was making? I definitely feel that looking back at my own. I feel like it goes back and forth between, wow, that was a very amateur move, to like, that's a weird, kind of interesting choice that I clearly made because I just didn't know any better. I wasn't being clever or, insightful. I just had no clue that it would be weird to voice things that way or whatnot. Did you have any relationship with it like that?
I I mean, I try not to be too hard on it, but I think I was lucky in a sense that Hitman 2 was a game where Agent 47 is a world traveler. So we go to Russia, Iran, India, Sicily. I mean, we're all over the place. And they wanted the music to reflect the locations. And there's also some themes. 47 makes the decision is, of course, the theme for Mr. 47. But I could very much tap into the whole idea of a world traveler and being inspired by the music styles for all these different areas. And that definitely helped me, uh, figure out how to write the score. And that also coming out of the demo scene, have written hundreds and hundreds of tracks. I tried to do anything I could think of and write any kind of music I could think of. So I had already written and researched a lot of these music styles already, just from sheer interest.
Sure, yeah.
Uh, you know.
Yeah, still, how funny to think that it's, just like that, you getting rolling then, which surely was kind of a turning point as a freelance composer. I mean, Hitman was such a big deal, 20 odd years ago. And those games are still a big deal. I mean, it's literally, there's a brand new one out in the last few weeks, and
Right,
it has remained such a big part of the gaming uh, culture and the diet of gamers. It's just always endlessly interesting to me when things they kind of latch on. I mean, Assassin's Creed is no different in that regard, almost as long, but we're not there yet. The there was something I was going to ask you. Oh, it was. I guess I'm just not done unpacking this idea of the relationship with older music, because it's one of those that you obviously also have this in the form of Ezio's Family, where it's a good quote problem to have when something follows you around forever,
right,
because people tend to love it. But I find that it is such a common thing amongst composers that we feel, you know, a kind of mixed relationship, I guess, with these pieces, because you think, if I'd had any knowledge that this would be something that gets so much notice, I might have approached it differently, for better or worse. And because I just can't stop thinking about the fact that we were sitting there in Poland listening to this music that was, a couple of decades old, and surely not written imagining that would ever be happening all those years later.
right. I mean, I have scores that follow me around for sure. Like Freedom Fighters is another one. I hear quite often from people, "Oh, Freedom Fighters, that's the one." And
That's almost as old
I
too. Wasn't that game like 2002 or something like that?
yeah, 2003, I think. Yeah, but you know the fact that it's a live for Freedom Fighters, the fact that it's a live choir mixed with electronics and beats, when I hear that, I know that my beat production these days are, of course, better, but I hear something different when I listen to it, and I just kind of hear like a raw kind of a energy coming out from it. And it's clearly beats made with drum machines, whereas today I would use a lot of additional processing and stuff.
Of
Um,
course, yeah.
but it has its kind of a, in my head, I'm at peace with it, and I look at it like it has its sound and its charm too. And I just think about, I went for it as far as being creativity and trying to mix unusual aspects. I mean, you should see having this traditionally trained classical choir singing on top of these like insane DJ beats, right? And this was back in 2003. Perhaps it's more common to mix things together now, but this was clearly, I was like, this is awesome, just to see people's reaction. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I'm at peace with it. It's a good thing to have that perspective, because it means that I keep trying to improve myself. And if I look back at uh, I would have done things differently, well, that means I'm still trying to get better as a composer. So that's how you should feel, if you're always trying to improve yourself.
Of course, absolutely. Have you ever gone back and like Freedom Force is actually a pretty good example, or Freedom Fighters? I mean, have you ever gone back, especially recently, and heard some of that older stuff and thought, I should dust off some of that old gear. Or I should see if I could recreate that particular sound because that was good and that's more inspiring to me than some Omnisphere patch, that kind of thing. Like, do you ever find yourself trying to delve back into those older wells?
With Freedom Fighters, no, for sure. It's like a timepiece for me. It just sits there, and it has a little bit of that sound that was happening back then. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I like to, you know, as much as I can, create my own instruments. It's not that I do, that I do it always. Sometimes you end up using patches from here or there, but and so I feel very much that those sounds are connected to Freedom Fighters, and so pulling those out and reusing them again, I don't know.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel right.
No, I get that. To me, that would be like uh, reusing a melody that because you like how it sounds, but it really belongs to the thing that it was originally conceived for, and so yeah, it would be a
And
strange.
what blows me away is like when you think about how fans of this music have probably heard this music more than we ever heard it making it. And so they will probably pick up on things if we try to do something like that. And we might not even it's just a sound I used before. But like, imagine, I mean, if it was like one of Vangelis's albums, or some, his early work or something. I mean, I would have like, yeah, any little thing, I would be like, yeah, I've heard that album 500 times. Don't mess with that.
Yeah, no, it's true. Uh, well, so then it was only a few years after that, then that you had this wonderful coming together with Ubisoft, which has cast a very long shadow for all of us fellow composers. Um, why don't you just tell the story? How did it go? How did you connect with them? What was your impression on the AC, in those early days, and take me on an adventure here.
Okay. So I later found out that Patrice Desilets was a fan of Hitman, and Hitman Contracts, Hitman Blood Money, these games. So that could have been why he was interested in working with me. So when Ubisoft showed me what they were attempting to do, it was they had concept art, and I didn't see anything running yet. And I remember meeting at E3 at a hotel room, and Jay Raymond and Patrice was showing me what they were intending to do, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is the most ambitious thing I have ever seen. There was no 3D open world platformer back then. I think GTA 3 had just revolutionized the industry by creating an open online world, taking GTA 2 and put it in a 3D. It was totally new. And so Assassin's Creed doing this with much more uh, detail, you felt much closer to the environment. You could climb anything. They were like, yeah, you see those mountains, you see that stuff all the way over there on this concept art. Yeah, you can go there and you can climb that. And I'm like, yeah, really? I mean, this is insane.
It's so funny. I can only imagine what it was like showing them kind of tease what they're planning. And as much as all of that was truly as impressive, I mean, we forget, especially now with, a dozen more of them since then. It's easy to kind of take some of those advances for granted. But I will never forget, for me, the thing that blew my mind was the cloth simulation on his clothes.
Oh,
As
the
you,
animation. Yeah, the
it was
animation is so good.
it was truly amazing. It was the first time I remember playing a game where I thought that looks like a real piece of clothing. I mean, it
Yeah.
moves with his running and with his climbing in a way that at the time it absolutely shattered me. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I agree. The animation in those games were truly groundbreaking. It's unbelievable what they were able to achieve. But yeah, Assassin's Creed One felt like the first true next generation game to me. I was like, wow, we didn't take a step, we took like a leap.
Yeah,
This is insane. I don't know if we had another leap since. I mean, everything is of course better, but that was a leap that was just like, whoa. you know.
yeah. It would be hard to think off the top of my head what I might liken it to. There are. It seems like the leaps tend to now be in less all-encompassing ways, where the game just across 50 different dimensions is taking this leap, but it's more that it's leaping in one particular category. Like the first game, for whatever reason, that jumped to mind was No Man's Sky, where
Right.
the sheer scope of what open world can mean took this just bafflingly gigantic leap forward. But it's not like 30 other things about that game are also taking the leap in the same manner. So I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a good way to frame the original AC, and also just it's cool. It's heartening to think that you were looking at the game and could see it for what it was. That it was clear from the beginning the level of their ambition, and that none of this was, as it were, by accident, which of course it never could be. But you know what I mean? Sometimes people kind of stumble into a hit, and sometimes they set their eyes for some moon shaped prize in the sky and actually manage to land on it and not just go down
Right.
in a blaze of glory.
I was so happy, for Ubisoft that AC1 came out as great as it did. I mean, it must have been a huge effort for them to just take and step up the whole industry that much. I mean, that doesn't just me being, I used to be a part of owner of a game company. I know what it takes to make these kind of. I mean, this must have just been an insane amount of faith, and I love when the industry takes chances like this, and wins. It's just it's awesome.
Was there any? Well, actually, let me phrase this differently. What were the nature of the initial conversations about music? Did they have a specific kind of aesthetic in mind? What did they tell you that led to the first sketches and whatnot that you were doing?
Yeah, so Assassin's Creed 1 has takes place in the Middle East, and it has a Christian side to it with the city, the area of Acre. It has Damascus, which is obviously a Muslim populated city with more Middle Eastern influenced music, and then it has Jerusalem, which takes both of those cities and puts it into a melting pot to create a third kind of sound. So that was the first thing we had to figure out. Um, the three words I got from the team to work with was let's see, it was war, it was tragedy. I mean, obviously the tragedy of the Third Crusade, and it was, and here's my favorite, mysticism. And I was like, mysticism, holy moly, that really became something I felt like, because those are the two words. Of course, there's war,
Sure, yeah.
and of course everything is the time period. It had to be tragic because we're playing a historical game, so that was very cool to be able to tap into that. Not a lot of people were doing it back then. These historical games. But mysticism opened up a world for me where I thought, man, if we can get something going within this mysticism and within this more serious tragicness, there's a really interesting world there to explore that doesn't get explored every day.
How much
And
did they?
yeah,
How much did they walk you through? Because one of the great twist and surprise of that game is that Assassin's Creed is actually a kind of futuristic sci-fi.
right.
So how much did that factor into the equation in terms of you know is that did you want to have kind of breadcrumbs in the score to that? Did you how much did they make you aware that that was where this was all headed? It's astonishing to hear some of the stories where a composer will be working in kind of blind, like working in the dark, not really fully aware of all the different details, or in some cases those details are still being figured out and they don't even know what to tell them yet, depending on how early you're involved. Like just because
Right.
that's such a big part of it. I'm just curious to know what you knew and when and how it influenced everything.
I mean, they did send me a lot of videos, so I did get to see the game in motion. It was just the very beginning was more concept art stages, but so I did get a pretty good look at the game. But it's true, the game was changing as it was being made because as a brand new game and such an innovative game, people didn't really know it was still being shaped. And as far as the animus, the team very much wanted to remind the player that you were playing in a simulation. So we were thinking a lot about um, how do we remind the game player of that. And so that was another big effort on Assassin's Creed 1, trying to figure out that side of it. And that's where the whole mixing electronics with live performances, and also taking live performances and instruments we record, and twisting them a bit and making things sound a bit off. We recorded with a choir in Seattle for Assassin's Creed 1, and then putting it all together in the end. And also the music had to be quite interactive. There's moments where you're eavesdropping. So I did, like, for example, a lot of eavesdropping music where you're just like sitting on a bench and you're
Mm-hmm.
just like, oh, anything going on around here? And then you see something suspicious. You're like, you get up, you start following somebody. Oh, okay, follow music, and then, oh, you're getting into some kind of light combat with this guy. Oh, you're running away. Oh, okay, we have something there too. Um, there were so many things we were figuring out as far as this gameplay that was just, I mean, did you have any games about eavesdropping, and following? It just wasn't a big thing back then. But now when you play Assassin's Creed, it's like, of course you can follow someone. This is always part of the gameplay, right?
Oh,
But
yeah, it
yeah,
was yeah, very, very incredibly memorable mechanics. Disappearing anonymously into a crowd in order to hide from the guards chasing you and all that kind of stuff. And
right.
never mind how insanely memorable the whole leap of faith thing was. I mean, yeah, it's just loaded top to bottom. And but you bring up a good thread that I'd love to to tease at, which is the notion of interactive music. Because I remember this is something you and I have talked about before in the context of Borderlands, and how particularly sort of densely designed their interactive system is. And I realized I didn't actually ask you about this in the context of these older games, and in particularly when you were running your own company. How big was interactive music as part of the scope of your work versus, here's music, so-called normal music that we're putting in the game?
On the Sega Genesis, there was no interactive music. It was like the level is playing out. We have music for this level. That's basically it. On Hitman 1 is the first time I was involved with interactive music. That was a absolute nightmare. It was a music program from Microsoft called Direct Music, the very first version of this program, and it looks like a database program. I mean, it is not like the creative sequences Cubase logic, we work with now, which is great for creativity and gets your ideas out instantly. It was like a database program. So I was like, there is no way in hell I'm going to be writing music with this thing. It is so uninspiring. I had to make all the music in the studio and then try to conform it into that program. And so, of course, once it's in that program, you can do music changes on the fly without any kind of loading or any kind of pause, and it goes on the beat and it's perfect. So the interactiveness of Hitman 1 is actually quite good. It's an older game, so obviously it's a bit limited. But compared to Hitman 2, I don't believe we did anything like as interactive of that. I think we had kind of had enough with Hitman 1. I mean, we were doing beautiful orchestral performances, so I don't know, putting those into little short passages to do stuff interactively, it didn't really enter our minds. We were trying to create these big beautiful set pieces.
Yeah, of course. And how about as the time has gone by, how would you kind of summarize your relationship to interactive music? Some composers, like I spoke a few months ago on here with the French composer Olivier de Rivière, who he and I have in common that it's kind of our obsession. But then there's plenty of others for whom it is an interesting subject, but it's not their primary driver, and they certainly manage to write really great scores without that being a priority for them. How do you kind of figure in that spectrum, just from a personal passion or curiosity perspective?
Well, I think my passion there depends on the amount of involvement I can have on the music system. You know what I mean? Like if you are creating a game and we need something really innovative and really interactive, and I can come up with ideas of how to present the music and how we can make this, like you turn this key and then this thing starts, and then if you do this, the reverb does this. When you can do really interesting things and you have programmers that are assigned to help you out with this stuff and there's a priority on it, then I'm very interested in it. I implemented the music for Freedom Fighters and Hitman 2, Hitman Blood Money, very, very closely with IO Interactive. As close as basically I told them what my ideas were for the music, and for the most part, it was all implemented that way. Don't play the music here, don't play it that many times, only play a little bit over here, do this and that. So I very much have an interest in that. But I do see the other side as well. When you are presented with a music system and you're like, this is our music system, this is what it does, and we need you to conform your music to work on that. And sometimes you're like, well, I like to write, if we're exploring right now, I like to write like 2-3 minutes music worth of exploring. But if you want the music system to indicate that now you're walking, now you're sitting, now you saw something up there, now if it becomes that, then it can become kind of tedious, because that's like the system starts to take over the musicality of it. And yes, perhaps it becomes a really fluent experience, but I feel the magic is kind of disappearing. It's it's the viewpoint I have on film music. Like, I am of the viewpoint that film music should be noticed. When I watched Blade Runner, how can anybody watch that movie and say I didn't notice the music? You know,
Yeah.
it's impossible. It's such a big part of the world. It's world building with the music, right? It creates this huge, vast, believable world. Other times you're like, yeah, you didn't notice the music in the film, and some people say, hey, you know, if you don't notice it, that means it's perfect. And so I don't know. I can see both. You know, I understand if you have a big action sequence, you don't want the music to get in the way, you know. But I very much think music is there. If we can create something that's noticed, it's if it's done carefully in the right way, it's only going to deepen the experience more. You know.
Yeah,
So
obviously that's one of those questions that comes down to the specifics of the filmmaker
yes,
or the game designer. You know, I think of, like you mentioned, an action sequence, and my mind immediately went to Inception, where, you know, Nolan practically pulls the sound, all the non-score gets pulled out, so that it's basically just visuals and music in even in the midst of some of these huge action sequences. And then
yeah,
you have the extreme opposite of a classic like Bullet, where the famous iconic car chase has no score at all. Like, let's
right.
just listen to the engine of the, you know, the engine sounds, that sort of thing. And
I
so
mean, I've worked with directors who is like, yeah, here's some reference music, and it's like a film, and all the soundtrack is just basically like a drone sound. It's like, you know, I like that kind of stuff, and you're like, hmm. I'm like,
yeah,
I
it's
don't
always
know, man.
disappointing. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Every now and again, a score like that is sort of stealthily brilliant, like genuinely catches you by surprise, and you go, wow, I
Right,
actually can't imagine it any other way. But more often than not, it seems to be coming from a fear to commit hard to a choice.
right.
And so
And it does fit that movie that he showed me, but what makes him think it fits his movie, and it's like I totally don't think it does, you know.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
anyway, you
Well,
know,
so going back to AC then, knowing, I guess I'm also curious, just given how iconic it turned out to be, very much including its music. Did you go through a bunch of different aesthetics and styles? Like, you were outlining the way the different cities and their cultural makeup influenced the score, but from the onset, you know, there's nothing period about that score. It's very contemporary, and it's unapologetically so. It's not, you know, rave beats and things like that, but it, you would not hear that and say, oh, this feels like it's, you know, like uh, archaeologically derived from what we know of Crusade era Jerusalem. I mean, it's a modern piece of music, and presumably
right.
the animus is used to kind of justify that. But I'm just curious how much of an exploration that was, because in hindsight, as the years have gone on, it feels increasingly like a bold choice. At the time, it just felt natural, and I didn't question it. And as time has gone by, I've really come to appreciate that you at the spear point, but collectively the team really took a chance on that.
Right. I mean, I think it helps that you have pieces of music like "City of Jerusalem" or "Flight Through Jerusalem," which what I was attempting to capture with that music was the, you know, the tragic, but also the spirituality of the period. Like, people, it's not that people aren't spiritual now. I mean, but back then people were just like really spiritual, right? It was a huge part of their life, and the church was everything. Um, but I think capturing that spirituality in the music immediately resonated with the game and the team. And when you are running across rooftops, there is some music that, I mean, it's not rave music, but it definitely throws on futuristic beats and gets, you know, more and more intense. On the soundtrack, that's the cue, Access the Animus. It's like a 10-minute cue full of beats, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Patrice really, he was like, we need something very modern for this sequence. And I was kind of thrilled, because it goes against what you're watching so much. And I love that kind of stuff where you're counteracting with what's going on, you know. And so yeah, especially when you're running across rooftops. That's where the team's feeling was that the Animus is being pushed to the limit, and you can even see the screen starting to tear a little bit and getting like noise thrown in, and the music is suddenly this like really kind of atmospheric techno music. That was very much what they wanted, but also the freedom I got to really push things.
Was there ever a period where you thought, I'm not sure if this is going to work? This is too strange for a period game. Like, was there ever any doubt, or did it just seemed right?
Yeah, I remember we recorded so I recorded a lot of ethnic instruments, and we had this professor of ethnic music, and we were in a session with him, and so we did some really like realistic folk music kind of performances with the rhythms and all the different flutes and everything. And I remember putting like this really intense sound design, very like evil stuff on top, and just like having that play. I don't know if we got to use that, but that was definitely what like two totally different cues, ideas, and different. It even had like polyrhythms going on. You're just trying to like be as crazy as you
Yeah, it
can.
sounds amazing.
Yeah,
So you're just continuing to add to the list of things that I need to hear. So that didn't make it in.
I think it's on a. I think it's out there as a bonus track or something somewhere. It's a shame because only about I think what is it 40 minutes of music got released, and I think I wrote about 3 hours of music from that score.
Oh
But
my
of course,
God.
you play the game, it's all in there. But the soundtrack was only, I think, I forget now, 10 tracks or something. It's
But have they not done a retrospective kind of expanded edition or something? I seem to remember a few years ago there was kind of a big box set of AC music that was multiple games all packaged together. Uh,
Yeah, those were all the regular versions of the scores. I think that was what something else was putting out when they started putting out all the different
right, I see. Yeah, yeah.
soundtrack releases.
Well,
Finally, we got them out.
I remember on the second game, um, when the first one came out was right at the around the time, or somewhere around there was shortly after I had moved to LA, and so I was kind of learning the who's who in town, and of course I was also a gamer. And I distinctly remember a couple of years later seeing photos of you and I think a group of strings recording at Capitol
Right.
for the second one. And I remember at the time that was one of the first times I had ever seen photos of a game recording at Capitol. And as history would reveal, it was not a very long-lived window of time recording game scores in Los Angeles. What happened there in terms of coming in to do the sequel? Was it one of those just, I guess, to be expected? All right, how do we kind of raise the bar on what we did, or walk through how you approached tackling the sequel differently?
Yeah, they were definitely wanted to raise the bar on the second one, and we did a union session at Capitol, which was amazing. And eh, I when I first saw footage from Assassin's Creed 2, it was so it was so unusual. The team would show me these lighting tests they have done, and I just immediately was like, "Whoa, this is so romantic!" And they were like, showing me all these romantic settings and with this mood lighting and at night and these festivals, and I was thinking to myself, I need to go write a really atmospheric score because this is what they're looking at as an inspiration for the game. So that was very much my starting point, and then of course the Renaissance as well, trying to figure out how to do some music there that they didn't want me to go and do anything that felt realistic to the time period. They wanted me to be inspired by the Renaissance, but to bring it up to date with like a modern take or something. So this became the philosophy, and then of course mixing it with synthesizers and
Was that
musical sound design and all that.
was that established from the onset, or did you have any early experiments on blending in Renaissancey kind of things?
That was from the beginning. They wanted a Renaissance score, but updated to
I see.
2009 whenever it was standards.
Yeah, so there's no garbage bin full of a bunch of like shawms and old woodwinds and things like that.
Not in this one.
Yeah, that's the imagination fantasizes all the same. Well, so obviously the big thing to come out of that was Ezio's family, which has become the Jesper anthem, and for composers, myself included, who have had the opportunity to dip our toes in the AC world since then, it's basically always the first conversation. Okay, what do you want me to do with Ezio's family? What?
I'm sorry, man.
Are you kidding? It lives in my conscience forever, and I think it's hilarious that on Syndicate I wrote something in the neighborhood of 3.5 hours of score, and I think that my take on Ezio's family, which kind of blends it with the Syndicate theme, is far and away the most popular track from that score. So basically, I'm just riding your coattails and happily dancing in your shadow.
That's a great take on that cue, though.
Well, it was a lot of fun. That whole score was actually funny because I said to them, how much are you looking for me to kind of channel what exists prior, particularly with what Jesper did as the foundation for this whole franchise? And they said, actually, we'd like to conscientiously be really different, except that we do want to have one big, strong homage somewhere. And they didn't know where. And it was like, well, what if it's the menu? So, because it couldn't really find anywhere that it made sense in the game, particularly since Syndicate really heavily de-emphasized all the modern day Animus stuff, and it only showed up in a few cutscenes. And we also made the choice to not score any of those cutscenes. So 100% of the score was for the Victorian era London stuff. And so that it was like, okay, well, where do we put in Ezio's families? Well, the natural thought is either credits or the menu. And so that gave me an excuse to kind of blend that palette in a way that would have not really made sense in the context of the score, just given the parameters that they were telling me to play with. So anyway, I have
Right.
I have no experience of something like that. Hearing composer after composer do this rendition on my tune. I mean, what has that experience been like for you over the years? When at some point, obviously, Ubisoft started hiring sort of a succession of different composers on these games, but everybody had this task of tackling. Just walk me through, what's been your reaction to that? Do you ever? Well, I'll just leave it open-ended. What has been your reaction to that?
Right. I mean, I'm hugely honored that they're using this cue, and of course, it was written, for Ezio, hence, Ezio's family. But it's always super interesting to hear these different takes on it, and I'm honored Ubisoft is using it. It's great also to go on YouTube and see how many remixes the fans have made.
Yeah.
And I think I've realized by composing something like in a bit more simple way really leaves the music open for interpretation in so many ways, and that has really been something like I was like, whoa. But yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's been amazing to see the life it has had outside of Assassin's Creed 2. When I listen to it now, I think more about the sacrifice of the assassins and what they have to go through, and how it affects their family and their friends. The secretive nature of being an assassin. So it's kind of transcended its original purpose.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I remember a few months ago when the marketing was all revving up on Valhalla, which obviously, for context, that was your triumphant return to Assassin's Creed after the better part of a decade, if I'm not mistaken. First off, just what was that like, returning to this old friend? But secondly, specifically, taking on this old theme. You've obviously grown as a person considerably since writing it originally. family life is different. Your professional evolution has changed. What was it like returning to that piece particularly?
Yeah, I mean, it was great fun to return to Valhalla and the Assassin's Creed universe. One thing I knew from the get go, um, when this started to take shape, was that I didn't want to repeat myself. I had, yeah, I wanted to do something new, and the Valhalla time period really lent itself well to that. So it felt really good going back there. Um, I hadn't really thought about even ever doing another version of Ezio's Family. I mean, I think I felt like I did three versions of it for the Assassin's Creed 2 soundtrack, with Venice Rooftops and Earth being the other two. So I really had no kind of reason to go back to it. But it was great fun to do. It was one of the last cues I wrote for Valhalla, and I felt like once I had the full scope of what the soundtrack sounded like, and I could. It was easier to go back and remix it. Had I been asked to remix it from the get go, I would have been like, wait, what? Because it's always it can be a challenge to go back to those pieces, but it was the right time. I had finished the score almost, and I knew what it all sounded like. So it was great fun. I worked with Einar. Einar Selvig on that. That was great. He lent his voice to it.
He's absolutely amazing.
He is, and he provided some poems for it as well, which are in there. It was really a great experience.
It is my understanding that you and Sarah worked pretty independently from one another, and so I'm curious what defined your role versus hers, how much that was established from the beginning, all of that.
Yeah, so we worked independently on the score, apart from the theme, and we were assigned a lot of the same gameplay cues. So if there was let's say there was two stealth cues that I would write, then Sarah would also write two stealth cues, and so they would have four stealth cues, and that very much is how a lot of the gameplay music was created. And as far as the regions within the game, the regions I worked on were Norway, Wessex, Northumbria, East Anglia, the present music, and Wineland, and also Jotunheim. So we were assigned different areas.
How much music would you say you ended up writing?
That was about 3 hours of music.
And I assume she did similarly. Plus, Einar wrote a bunch of in-world music, right? I mean, it sounds like there's, like 7+ hours of score in the game.
Yeah, I think Sarah. I think we talked about it. We ended up writing about the same amount of music, 3 hours each, and I think Einar Selvig is probably about 2 hours, I'm guessing. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's about 7 hours of music. I mean, it was a massive effort. The game is ginormous. I'm still playing it. I'm like 99 hours in, and I haven't, and I'm not even going for all the side missions. I'm playing the main story, and it is mind-boggling what they have achieved with this game. I am so excited to be part of it.
It's funny because I started playing it, and I've always been a fan. I mean, like we were talking a minute ago, even when the first one came out, I just was instantly converted, and I thought, there've been a lot of high points over the years on this franchise, a lot of really memorable moments across almost every one of them. I mean, it's a spectacular IP. But as life goes on, I find my palate for time, like massively time consuming games has been getting strained, and so every new AC comes out, I'm always a little bit afraid of it. But Valhalla was just so seductive looking and so beautiful, and I loved the setting, and I started playing it, and then once I realized how giant it was, I was like, I think I better shut off the PlayStation, or I might never be heard from again.
Yeah.
Hearing you
I
talk in terms of 99 hours is like, holy shit, that's twice as bad as I realized.
Right. I don't have time to play games that much either, but I definitely made it a mission in life to complete this one. So I'm holding on to it, and it's really stuck me in. And I love seeing how the music is been implemented, and it's such a beautiful game as well. I'm really with they have the weather systems and the way the sun sets on the world and stuff. It's really cool.
Well, it is a truly, there aren't a lot of composers, even among the very successful in this business, who are so consistently celebrated for such an iconic contribution. But your attachment to that franchise is one of those. It would be like, you know, when inevitably there's a new, I mean, it's already happened a little bit, but a new Star Wars film without John Williams, there's some contingent of the audience who will just not be interested on that basis. And I know that that is the case with you and AC. I remember getting those messages of saying, with all due respect, like I can't tell you how many tweets I read that were something along the lines of, look, Journey's cool, but with Syndicate, I mean, if it's not Jesper, I'm sorry, I'm just pass. And I
Oh
think
man.
I love that loyalty though, because you really did manage to make something that outlives the games themselves. I mean, there's just so few times that happens, and the fact that you've been able to go back again and again and again and keep finding new things, it's genuinely inspiring. It makes all the rest of us realize, shit, we got to sit up and pay attention and actually work that much harder.
Oh man, thanks for saying that, dude. Yeah, the Assassin's Creed fans are really something special. I must say, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, well, and obviously before COVID, it's worth including. There was the Assassin's Creed Symphony, which was starting to make the rounds around the world of fully orchestral reimaginings of music from just about every game in the franchise, which means that about half that concert is your music. Never mind the fact that all the vignettes into the other games still invariably includes that game's version of Ezio's Family. So it's basically a Jesper tour in which a few other composers make cameo appearances, I think.
Ah, dude. No, there's so many composers who've contributed to that franchise now. It's really some awesome music being written there.
Well, I certainly don't take for granted my own gratitude at having been able to be a small part of it. But I don't want to use up endless amounts of your time. But obviously we didn't even touch on Borderlands, which is an equally gigantic part of the industry, and you have a truly a huge contribution to that, and on and on. I've actually, funny enough, recently been playing. Uh, uh, Without saying too much, I'm working on a game that one of the developers said, what might be interesting? You should check out Vermintide 2. And that might prove to be something that would be good to check out. And I started playing it, having no idea that you scored it. And then I was playing, I was like, ooh, this is cool. And then the first time this one particular thing happened in the game where, basically this just giant flood of rats and horrible things would come charging at me. There was this very distinctive cue that consistently would trigger each time. And I remember thinking, I gotta look this up. And of course, pull up Spotify and laugh like, oh, of course it is. So I feel bad sort of glossing over the 40 other noteworthy titles. But as we wrap up here, I'm just curious, there aren't a lot of composers that have been in the business as long as you have, and you've really been able to witness, just even talking about the demo scene days and then the actual, for lack of a better way to put it, the hardware synthesis era of this industry, wherein music was being written directly to the chipset on which the game is also being rendered, through to today, and recording live orchestras and of course, dusting off the old analog synths and going to orchestral concerts of this music. You've been able to witness quite a lot, but I'm curious, just what is your take on how things have changed, and what is what do you find yourself looking forward towards, if that's not too vague of a question?
Right. I mean, there's a few different ways to answer that. I mean, I can start by saying, for me personally, it hasn't changed that much in that I still, um, get hired and look for projects that are creative, where I get to do something new that I haven't done before. That's still very much my mission. As far as the industry, it's back when I started making music for games, it wasn't like a very desirable place to be. People were not looking at like game scoring as anything very attractive. And now you have, film composers, bands. I mean, everybody is looking at games, and it has such a almost glamorous side to it now that is I mean, it's of course it's not the Oscars, I get that, but it has grown so much since the beginning. And from the days of video gaming very much being in Europe, it was very much in Britain that the British game industry started this whole thing. And of course, over on the US side, it was more about the consoles from Nintendo and Sega. But the whole thing has come together now into this vast, ginormously powerful, thing that outdoes music and film. It is unbelievable to think about. And now we have people going to the concert house, right? These
Yeah, exactly.
beautiful, beautiful opera houses that, very glamorous places, and they're playing video game music. It's wonderful.
Is there any, as I imagine happens, a lot of us get younger composers asking us for advice or tips and that sort of thing. Is there anything that you find yourself consistently suggesting the younger folks do?
Well, I can only speak to my experience and what worked for me. And what's worked for me is to always be true to myself. And that does take, it takes work, and it takes a certain kind of knowing yourselfness that you have to be aware of. And I'm sure you're fully aware of this, because as composers, we spend so much time with ourselves, right? It's like when you're out and about in an office or something, you're spending time with coworkers, but we spend so much time alone that we have to, and so much is being asked of us all the time. You have to perform every day. And if you go into the office and you're not feeling great, you can kind of still, get through it. But you go to the studio, you're not feeling great. You're going to write you're going to make some people unhappy with some crappy music. So there's so much pressure, and you have to really get to know yourself. And that's another thing. I mean, of course, that comes with age and experience, but I'm sure you can probably relate to this.
Oh
It's,
yeah, of course, absolutely. The fact that you have to kind of be on all the time is something I think a lot of folks don't realize when they're first getting started.
yeah,
There aren't like it is helpful that as freelancers, often the lack of 9 to 5 means that if you have a bad day, you can usually afford to, you know, chalk that day up to whatever was going on and toss it out and not be out of time. But not always, which means that
yeah.
you really have to have methods in place to ensure that you can stay on it, and that you can actually deliver.
And that goes to one of my points as well, that you shouldn't be too hard on yourself, because you're still, if you're a new composer, you're still learning, and it takes time to learn how to not be so hard on yourself. I mean, I still write music that I don't like or that gets rejected, and you just have to be able to get over it very quickly, and don't sit and think about that. Whether you like the piece, sit and think about, oh, how great you thought that piece was. How dare they, right? You cannot think about, that's not a helpful way to think. Or you can't do the opposite and think this music is terrible. How can I ever make it? I think what helped me coming out of the demo scene is that I just started making music because I loved it, and I was like 13, and I'm like, I'm just going to make music because I can't not make music. I have the tools in front of me. I'm just going to do it. And my music was not very good for a while, that's for sure, for years. And I was just trying to learn, but not being so hard on yourself and being okay with, writing music that, you might have to redo, or just not being so hard on yourself, I think is some advice I'd like to give, because, with all this, these days, everything is so instant gratification, like, if you think you're going to be you want to be a composer, but that doesn't mean that you sit down and write some great music right away. And if it doesn't sound great, then you're not meant to be a composer. This is not how it works. You got to slow it down, and you're gonna take your time. And if you really want to be a composer, you're gonna just keep composing until your music gets to a point where you feel it's good.
Too true. I can't improve on that. One last thing that occurred to me, what you mentioned a minute ago, and you may not have an answer to this, because I know when I've been asked something similar, I typically don't, but I'm curious anyway. When you said that your career today in many ways reflects the way it did in the earliest days, and that it's still just about trying to find creatively compelling projects that you can hopefully add a stamp to in some way, shape, or form. Is there a kind of game, whether it's a genre or just a style of game or whatnot, that you've never worked on that is kind of a bucket list item where you think, oh, I've always wanted to do X? You've done so many, it's hard for me to imagine, but I'm just curious if there's some little, fantasy Jesper score that we're still waiting for.
There's actually, I am a huge fan of Subnautica, so I think I have never done an underwater score. That is something I have never done. And I was thinking, if I was ever to do an underwater score, it would have to be something completely opposite of what you would expect an underwater score to be. I don't have the answer because I haven't done the research, but I'm just saying I love those underwater games. I've been playing Aquanox was another underwater game I played years ago. Those games, there's something. I know you've done an underwater score.
Yeah, I was going to say I have a little experience on this one, and it was amazing. Part of what I loved about that experience on Abzu was that the game was aware. And I should say it's funny that you say how much you love underwater games, because the joke was always every underwater level in games that are otherwise not underwater is always the least favorite. It's always the one that everyone goes, oh God, like in a Mario game, the underwater level is always just the cursed, horrible, everybody hates it. It's like escort missions in shooters. They're just always the worst. And so it's really funny to seek it out. But yeah, on Abzu, that was part of the conceit from the team, was where we were all too aware, and Giant Squid, they were all too aware that most people have a very fraught relationship with this whole concept. And so the idea was, can we make something that's really sort of flowing and beautiful and relaxing, and or when it's exciting, it's exciting, but even in a meditative sort of way. And the goal, of course, with the music was to try to find the same thing, that it doesn't channel the intrinsic scariness that a lot of people feel about the underwater. And there's like I've spent a lot of time scuba diving, for example, and a lot of people assume it's very claustrophobic. And for me, it was always the opposite. I said it's the closest I imagine I'll ever feel to what it's like to fly. It couldn't have been more opposite of claustrophobic.
Right.
But I get why people go to that. Just the notion of being so dependent on your gear and looking at the world through those goggles and all the rest. But
right.
Well, that's good to know. That's not remotely an answer I was expecting. I love that you had such a specific take. So the next, when they make like the Jules Verne Assassin's Creed, that's the journey to the bottom of the ocean, the version, you'll be right on deck. And if they offer it to me, I will say respectfully I decline, because there's only one composer who I think can tackle this, and you know him already.
Right. I think they already went to Atlantis and Odyssey, right? But that's definitely.
Oh, you're right. I never made it. It's funny. That was one of those that I played like probably 15 hours, and then I realized, oh my God, I think I've done 1% of the game, and I had to move on with my life begrudgingly.
You're like, don't tell me I've done one. Just keep it hidden.
It's true. That's a good point. Well, my dear sir, thank you for doing this, and on your birthday, no less.
Of course, you're welcome.
It is an absolute pleasure. As I said, it is a privilege as well, given your status in this industry and all that you've done to kind of elevate the art and craft of it. I think for the fact that we can both marvel at the fact that, you know, concerts, orchestral concerts, or never mind even orchestral, you know, DJ sets and bands, video game music enjoys quite a lot of popular presence in the mainstream audiences. And I think that your work is a big part of what has pushed it there and made people realize that this is not just the beeps and boops of old. Of course, I think you and I would also be quick to defend the artistic integrity of that music too. But
Right.
but you know what I mean. I think we all collectively owe you a debt, and so it's wonderful to finally have you here on this show to walk us through how you've built this empire.
Okay, man. Well, thank you so much.
It is my absolute pleasure, and see you again soon, hopefully in person.
All right. Thanks, dude. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.